Blood streaked across the twilight sky as Josephine Lambert clutched her side, each step sending waves of agony through her battered body. She had been running for 3 days straight, sleeping in short bursts hidden among rocks and brush, her once fine dress now torn and stained with dirt and her own blood. The barn loomed ahead like a mirage in the distance, the first sign of civilization she'd seen since fleeing the massacre at Silver Creek. Her vision blurred as she stumbled the final yards, her strength finally giving out as she collapsed against the weathered barn door, the world spinning into darkness around her. The year was 1875, and the Arizona Territory was still as wild and unforgiving as the day the first settlers had arrived. Quinn Thornton had spent the last 5 years of his life building his ranch from nothing but dust and determination. At 30 years old, he had the calloused hands and weathered face of a man who had fought the elements and won, though not without cost. The loneliness of ranch life had settled into his bones like the desert cold at night, but he had long ago accepted that as the price of his independence. Quinn was returning from checking his fence line when he spotted something unusual by his barn, a splash of color against the weathered wood that didn't belong. Approaching cautiously, rifle at the ready, he discovered not a threat but a woman, unconscious and clearly in dire need of help. Blood had soaked through her dress at the side, and her face was so pale it nearly matched the white dust covering her clothes. "Madam," he called, setting his rifle down and kneeling beside her. When she didn't respond, he gently lifted her, noting how light she felt in his arms. "Hang on," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "I've got you now." The small ranch house wasn't much, but it was clean and sturdy. Quinn laid the woman on his bed, then hurried to heat water and gather what medical supplies he had. He'd tended enough injuries on himself and his livestock to know the basics, though treating a lady presented complications he hadn't anticipated. Propriety demanded restraint, but her life demanded action. With careful, respectful movements, he cleaned the wound at her side, a deep gash that appeared to have come from a knife rather than a bullet. The bleeding had mostly stopped, which he took as a good sign. After applying a poultice of herbs he'd learned to use from an old Apache woman who'd once saved his life, he bandaged the wound and covered her with a clean blanket. Then came the waiting. Quinn made coffee and sat in the chair beside the bed, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Who was she? What had happened to her? And what kind of trouble might be following in her wake? Questions without answers swirled in his mind as the night deepened around the small ranch house. It was near dawn when Josephine finally stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes the color of summer skies. For a moment, confusion clouded those eyes, then panic surged as she tried to sit up, only to fall back with a gasp of pain. "Easy now," Quinn said, his voice deliberately gentle. "You're safe here." Josephine's gaze darted around the unfamiliar room before settling on the stranger before her, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the warm brown of coffee and hair the color of wheat touched by sun. "Who?" she managed, her throat painfully dry. Quinn reached for a cup of water he'd kept ready. "Name's Quinn Thornton. This is my ranch. Found you passed out by my barn door yesterday evening." He helped her take a sip. "Mind telling me who might be after you?" The question brought everything rushing back: the attack on the stagecoach, the driver and guard shot down, her fellow passengers murdered while she hid beneath the overturned coach, the days of running. Tears welled in her eyes. "Josephine Lambert," she whispered. "They killed everyone else." Quinn's expression remained calm, though his jaw tightened slightly. "Bandits," she nodded. "The stage from Tucson to Prescott 3 days ago." Her hand trembled as she reached for the water again. "I hid when they left. I just ran," Quinn nodded, making a mental calculation of the distance. "That's more than 40 miles. You've been running all that time." "Had to," she said simply, her eyes meeting his with unexpected strength despite her condition. "They were looking for something they thought was on the stage. When they didn't find it, they were angry. I heard them say they'd hunt down anyone who escaped." Quinn's expression darkened. "Well, they won't find you here. You rest now. We'll figure the rest out when you're stronger." Josephine wanted to protest, to warn him of the danger he was now in because of her, but exhaustion claimed her once more, pulling her back into darkness. Her last thought before sleep took her was that his eyes reminded her of the steadiness of earth, something solid, when everything else had fallen away. The next 3 days passed in a blur of fevered dreams for Josephine. She would wake to find Quinn offering water or broth, changing her bandages with careful hands, or simply sitting nearby, whittling or reading by lamplight. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, concern mixed with something deeper, more contemplative. On the 4th morning, she woke with a clearer head and found herself alone in the small bedroom. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating a simple room with a dresser, washstand, and the bed where she lay. A clean dress had been draped over the back of a chair, not her size exactly, but close enough. With painful slowness, Josephine managed to sit up. The wound in her side protested, but the stabbing agony had subsided to a persistent ache. She reached for the dress, noting that it was simple but of good quality, though clearly worn. The sound of movement from another room told her Quinn was nearby. It took all her strength to dress herself, but Josephine was determined not to remain bedridden any longer. She had imposed on this stranger's kindness enough already. When she finally opened the bedroom door, she found herself in a modest main room that served as both kitchen and living area. Quinn stood at a cast-iron stove, his back to her as he tended something that smelled wonderfully of cinnamon. He turned at the sound of the door, surprise evident on his face. "You should be resting," he said, setting down a wooden spoon. "I've imposed enough already," Josephine replied, her voice stronger than it had been days before. "You've been very kind, Mr. Thornton." "Quinn," he corrected automatically, "and it's no imposition," he gestured to the table. "Sit before you fall, I've made breakfast." Too weak to argue, Josephine sank gratefully into a chair. Where did the dress come from? A flicker of something grief perhaps crossed his face. "It was my sister's. She lived here for a while after her husband died, moved back east 2 years ago." "Thank you," Josephine said simply. "For everything. I would have died if you hadn't found me." Quinn shrugged as he placed a plate of Johnny cakes before her. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with quiet certainty. "They wouldn't have." He met her gaze then, and something passed between them, an understanding of the world's harshness and the rarity of true kindness within it. Then he nodded once and returned to the stove. As they ate, Josephine slowly told him her story. She had been a schoolteacher in Tucson, traveling to Prescott to stay with her cousin after the small school where she taught had closed. At 24, she had already known her share of hardship. Orphaned at 16, working her way through normal school, taking teaching posts in frontier towns where education was often considered a luxury rather than a necessity. "What about you?" she asked when she had finished. "Have you always been a rancher?" Quinn's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "No, madam, was a cavalry scout for a time. Before that, drove cattle up from Texas, saved enough to buy this land 5 years back." He glanced around the modest home. "It's not much yet, but it's mine. Got about 200 head of cattle, 3 good horses, and enough water from the creek to keep everything alive through summer." "It's a fine place," Josephine said sincerely. The house was simple but clean, with touches that spoke of care: a shelf of books, a patchwork quilt over a rocking chair, a vase of wildflowers on the windowsill. "It'll be better once I finish the new barn and get the orchard started," Quinn replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "The trees are just saplings now, but give them 5 years." Josephine smiled, the first real smile since the attack. "You plan for the future, that's a good thing." Quinn looked at her thoughtfully. "Speaking of plans, we should figure out yours. Prescott's still a 3-day ride." "You're not ready for that yet." "I don't want to burden you further," Josephine began, but Quinn cut her off with a shake of his head. "It's no burden. Place could use a woman's touch anyway." He stood, collecting their plates. "You stay as long as you need. Get your strength back. Then we'll see about getting you to your cousin." Josephine wanted to protest, but found herself nodding instead. The thought of leaving this safe haven, of facing the journey to Prescott alone, was more terrifying than she cared to admit. "Thank you," she said again, the words wholly inadequate for the gratitude she felt. Quinn merely nodded and began washing the dishes, his back to her once more. Josephine watched him, noting the broad span of his shoulders beneath his simple cotton shirt, the careful way he handled the crockery with hands that could clearly break it without effort. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rough exterior, and she found herself wondering about the path that had led him to this solitary existence. The next week passed in a slow rhythm of recovery. Josephine regained her strength gradually, moving from sitting on the porch in the morning sunshine to helping with small tasks around the house. Quinn was gone much of the day, tending to his cattle and the endless work of the ranch, but he always returned by sunset, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a particularly interesting stone, once a book of poetry he'd traded for in the small settlement 10 miles away. They fell into an easy pattern, with Josephine taking over the cooking and mending while Quinn handled the ranch work. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the spectacular sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Sometimes they talked about books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they had held. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, each finding solace in the other's presence. 2 weeks after her arrival, Josephine stood at the clothesline, hanging freshly washed shirts to dry in the Arizona sun. Her side still ached when she reached too high, but the wound was healing well. She had just pinned the last shirt when she noticed a cloud of dust in the distance, riders approaching from the south. Her heart began to pound. In the time she had been at the ranch, no one had visited. Quinn had mentioned neighbors, but the nearest was miles away and rarely came calling. These riders were coming fast, with purpose. Abandoning the laundry basket, Josephine hurried as quickly as her healing body would allow toward the northern pasture where Quinn had gone to check on a pregnant heifer. Fear lent speed to her steps, and she found herself running despite the pain it caused. She spotted Quinn leading his horse back toward the house, his expression changing from surprise to concern as he saw her running toward him. "Riders," Josephine gasped when she reached him. "Coming fast from the south." Quinn's face hardened as he handed her his horse's reins. "Get to the house. My rifle's over the door. If I don't come back within 5 minutes, take the horse and ride north. Follow the creek. There's a settlement about 20 miles up." "I'm not leaving you," Josephine protested, but Quinn was already striding toward the house, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Do as I say," he called back, his voice brooking no argument. "I'll handle this." Josephine followed more slowly, leading the horse. From this distance, she could now see 5 riders approaching the ranch house. Fear gripped her heart, but she forced herself to think clearly. Quinn was right. If these were the same men who had attacked the stagecoach, she would need to flee. But abandoning him to face them alone seemed impossible. When she reached the house, Quinn was already standing on the porch, his stance relaxed but alert. The riders slowed as they approached, and Josephine's breath caught as she recognized the man in the lead, a tall figure with a distinctive red bandana who had directed the others during the stagecoach attack. "Afternoon," Quinn called, his voice neutral. "Something I can help you with?" The leader reined his horse to a stop, his eyes scanning the ranch before settling on Quinn. "Looking for someone, woman, early 20s, dark hair, blue eyes, might be injured. Seen anyone like that?" "Can't say that I have," Quinn replied evenly. "Been busy with calving." "Don't get many visitors out this way." From her position behind the corner of the house, Josephine could see the doubt on the leader's face. His gaze shifted to the clothesline where her dress and several of Quinn's shirts hung drying in the sun. "You do your own laundry, rancher?" he asked, a note of suspicion in his voice. Quinn didn't flinch. "Man's got to keep clean, even out here." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we have a look around? Woman we're after stole something valuable, belongs to my employer." "I mind very much," Quinn said, his hand still resting casually near his pistol. "This is private property. If your employer has legitimate business, he can take it up with the marshal in Prescott." The tension in the air thickened as the men stared at each other. Then the leader smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "No need to get unfriendly, just doing our job," He glanced at the clothesline again. "If you do happen to see her, there's a reward, $50. "I'll keep that in mind," Quinn replied. The leader nodded, then turned his horse. The other riders followed suit, but not before one of them, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, spat on the ground near Quinn's feet. Josephine remained hidden until the riders were mere specks in the distance. Only then did she approach Quinn, who still stood on the porch, watching the horizon. "They'll be back," she said quietly. Quinn nodded. "Yes, but not today." He turned to her, his expression grim. "What did you steal?" "Nothing," Josephine exclaimed. "I was just a passenger. I had nothing of value except my mother's locket and $10 in my reticule." Quinn studied her face for a long moment, then nodded again. "I believe you, but they think you have something or know something." Josephine frowned, thinking back to the chaotic moments of the attack. There was a man on the stage, a well-dressed gentleman. He had a leather satchel he kept close. "When the shooting started, he hid it under the seat. I saw him do it just before." Her voice faltered. "Before they shot him." "And the satchel?" "I don't know. I was hiding beneath the overturned coach. I heard them searching, getting angry when they couldn't find whatever they were looking for." Quinn's jaw tightened. "So they think you either took it or know where it is." "But I don't," Josephine insisted. "I ran as soon as I could. I never saw the satchel again." "It doesn't matter what's true," Quinn said grimly. "It matters what they believe." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You should leave tomorrow. I'll take you to Prescott myself." Josephine felt a pang at his words. The thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Quinn, was suddenly more painful than she had anticipated. In just 2 weeks, this place had begun to feel like home in a way nowhere had since her parents died. "What about your ranch, your cattle?" she asked. "The cattle can manage a week without me. Most of the calving is done." His eyes met hers, warm and steady. "Your safety matters more." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had voiced. Josephine found herself unable to look away from his gaze, from the quiet strength and unexpected tenderness she found there. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying more weight than simple gratitude. Quinn's hand lingered on her shoulder a moment longer, then fell away. "We'll leave at first light," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Pack whatever you need tonight." That evening, an unusual tension filled the small house. They ate dinner mostly in silence, each lost in thought. Josephine washed the dishes while Quinn cleaned his rifle and pistol at the table, preparing for the journey ahead. As she placed the last plate on the shelf, Josephine turned to find Quinn watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "What will you do when you reach Prescott?" he asked suddenly. Josephine considered the question. "Stay with my cousin, I suppose, look for a teaching position." The plan that had seemed so clear when she left Tucson now felt hollow, insufficient. "What will you do when you return here?" "Same as always," Quinn replied with a slight shrug. "Tend the cattle, build the barn, plant more trees." He paused, his fingers tracing a pattern on the wooden tabletop. "It'll be quiet again." "You don't mind the quiet?" Josephine asked softly. Quinn's eyes met hers across the room. "I used to think I preferred it." The implication of his words hung in the air between them, neither willing to take the next step toward acknowledging what had grown between them in such a short time. Finally, Josephine broke the silence. "I should finish packing," she said, though she had little to pack, just the borrowed dress and a few personal items Quinn had salvaged from her tattered clothing. Quinn nodded, returning his attention to his weapons. "We'll leave just after sunrise, should reach the settlement by nightfall. From there, it's another 2 days to Prescott if the weather holds." Josephine retreated to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the patchwork quilt. 2 weeks ago, she had been a half-dead stranger Quinn had rescued out of simple human decency. Now, the thought of leaving him created an ache deeper than her healing wound, but what choice did she have? The men would return, putting them both in danger. Quinn had already risked enough for her. She couldn't ask him to risk more, especially when she had nothing to offer in return except her heart, something she wasn't sure he wanted. Morning came too quickly, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten as they prepared to depart. Quinn had saddled 2 horses, his own sturdy gelding, and a smaller, gentle mare he said belonged to his sister. She left her here when she moved east, he explained as he helped Josephine mount. Said I might need her someday. They set out as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. Quinn led the way, setting a pace that was steady but not too demanding for Josephine's still healing body. They rode mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the miles stretched behind them. By midday, they stopped near a small creek to rest the horses and eat the food Josephine had packed: cornbread, dried beef, and apples from Quinn's carefully hoarded winter store. The day had grown warm, and Josephine removed her bonnet, allowing the breeze to cool her face. "How much farther to the settlement?" she asked as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "Another 15 miles or so," Quinn replied, taking a drink from his canteen. "We're making good time." Josephine nodded, her eyes on the distant mountains. "What's it like, the settlement?" "Small. Mostly ranchers and a few prospectors. Has a general store, a blacksmith." Quinn glanced at her. "No school yet, though there's talk of starting one. Lot of children growing up without much education." Josephine's interest was piqued. "How many families?" "Dozen or so within riding distance." "Maybe 30 children altogether." Quinn's expression was carefully neutral. "They could use a teacher." The implication of his words was clear, and Josephine's heart quickened. "Are you suggesting I stay there instead of continuing to Prescott?" Quinn met her gaze steadily. "Just mentioning the need. It's your decision." Josephine studied his face, searching for what lay beneath his carefully measured words. "Why did you really decide to take me yourself? You could have arranged for someone from the settlement to escort me." For a long moment, Quinn was silent, his eyes on the horizon. Then he turned to her, and the raw emotion in his gaze took her breath away. "Because I wasn't ready to say goodbye," he admitted, his voice low. "Not yet." The simple honesty of his words pierced Josephine to her core. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand covering his where it rested on his knee. "I wasn't ready either," she whispered, Quinn's fingers intertwined with hers, rough calluses against her softer skin. "I know it's too soon," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "You barely know me. But these past weeks have meant more to me than you know," Josephine finished for him. "I feel safe with you, Quinn, not just from those men, but," she struggled to find the words, "safe to be myself, to hope again." The distance between them seemed to disappear as Quinn leaned forward, his free hand gently touching her cheek. "Josephine," he murmured, her name a question and a prayer on his lips. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as years of loneliness and the unexpected joy of finding each other fueled their embrace. When they finally parted, Josephine felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, as if everything before this moment had been a prelude to what now lay before them. "I can't ask you to stay," Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not with those men still looking for you." "It wouldn't be fair." "Life isn't fair," Josephine replied softly, "but sometimes it gives us choices we never expected." She squeezed his hand. "Let's continue to the settlement. I want to see it before I decide anything." Quinn nodded, though reluctance showed in his eyes as he released her hand and stood. "We should keep moving if we want to arrive before dark." They mounted their horses and continued their journey, riding closer together now, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke more eloquently than words. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled, the flat desert giving way to gentle hills dotted with juniper and pine. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, and Josephine found herself grateful for the shawl Quinn had insisted she bring. It was late afternoon when they crested a hill and Quinn pointed ahead. "There it is, Juniper Creek." Josephine followed his gesture and saw a small collection of buildings nestled in a valley below. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and she could make out a wooden church steeple rising above the other structures. The settlement was indeed small, but it had an orderly appearance that spoke of community and permanence. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Quinn smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Wait until you meet the people, salt of the earth, most of them." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. As they approached the main street, little more than a wide dirt path lined with wooden buildings, several people called out greetings to Quinn. "Thornton, about time you showed your face in town. Quinn, Martha's been saving those apple preserves you like." Quinn acknowledged each greeting with a nod or a raised hand, his ease among these people evident. They stopped in front of a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it Miller's General Store and Hotel. A portly man with a magnificent white beard emerged from the doorway, his face breaking into a smile at the sight of Quinn. "Well, well, Quinn Thornton, as I live and breathe, and who's this lovely lady?" His eyes twinkled as he looked at Josephine. Quinn helped Josephine dismount before answering. "Josephine Lambert, this is Samuel Miller, owns most of this town, but we don't hold it against him." Samuel laughed, a booming sound that seemed to fill the street. "Only because I'm fair about it." He extended a hand to Josephine. "Welcome to Juniper Creek, Miss Lambert." "Thank you," Josephine replied, taking his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Miss Lambert needs a room for the night," Quinn said. "She's traveling to Prescott." Samuel's bushy eyebrows rose. "Prescott, that's still a good 2 days' ride." "You planning to escort her all the way, Quinn?" "That's the plan," Quinn confirmed, though his eyes flickered to Josephine as he spoke. "Well, Martha will be delighted to have a female guest," Samuel said, gesturing toward the door. Come in, come in." "She's just putting supper on the table, and there's plenty to share." The interior of the building was surprisingly spacious, with the store occupying the front half and living quarters in the back. A staircase led to the second floor where, Samuel explained, there were 4 rooms for travelers. The smell of fresh bread and stew filled the air, making Josephine realize how hungry she was after the long day's ride. Martha Miller proved to be as welcoming as her husband, a plump, energetic woman who immediately took Josephine under her wing, clucking over her pale appearance and insisting she sit by the fire while supper was laid out. During the meal, Josephine learned more about the settlement. Founded 10 years earlier by Samuel and a few other families, Juniper Creek had grown slowly but steadily. Most residents were ranchers or farmers, with a few tradesmen serving their needs. The nearest larger town was indeed a good 3 days' ride, making the settlement largely self-sufficient. "What brings you to these parts, Miss Lambert?" Martha asked as she served apple pie for dessert. Josephine hesitated, glancing at Quinn. They had agreed on the way to be truthful but cautious about her circumstances. "I was traveling to Prescott to stay with my cousin," she explained. "There was trouble on the road. Bandits attacked the stagecoach. I was the only survivor." She kept her voice steady, though the memories still brought pain. "Mr. Thornton found me when I collapsed near his ranch. He's been kind enough to help me continue my journey." Martha's expression was sympathetic. "You poor dear, how terrible for you." Samuel's face had grown serious. "Stagecoach robbery, you say? When was this?" "Nearly 3 weeks ago now," Quinn answered. "South of my place on the Tucson Road." Samuel nodded grimly. "Heard something about that from a trader passing through last week. Said the stage company was offering a reward for information." His eyes focused on Josephine with new interest. "Did you see the bandits? Could you identify them?" "Aye." Josephine began, uncertain how much to reveal. "She was hiding," Quinn interjected smoothly. "Didn't get a good look at anyone." Samuel seemed about to press the issue, but Martha placed a hand on his arm. "That's enough of such talk at the dinner table," she admonished. "The poor girl has been through enough without reliving it." The conversation turned to other topics, but Josephine noticed Samuel watching her thoughtfully throughout the remainder of the meal. When they had finished eating, Martha showed Josephine to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. "You rest now," Martha said kindly. "There's water in the pitcher if you want to freshen up. Breakfast is at 7, but come down whenever you're ready." Left alone, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, her thoughts in turmoil. The settlement seemed like a good place with kind people. The need for a teacher was real. She had seen children playing in the yards as they rode in. If she stayed here instead of continuing to Prescott, she would be closer to Quinn. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Opening the door, she found Quinn standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Propriety suggested she refuse, but Josephine found herself nodding and stepping aside to let him enter. She left the door partially open for the sake of appearances. "Samuel knows more than he's saying," Quinn said without preamble. "I think news of the stage robbery has spread, including that one passenger might have escaped." Josephine sank back onto the bed. "Do you think he suspects I'm that passenger?" "Maybe." Quinn leaned against the wall, his expression troubled. "But Samuel's a good man. If he knows, he'll keep it to himself." He paused. "What did you think of the town?" "It seems lovely," Josephine answered honestly. "The people are kind, and if they truly need a teacher." Hope flickered in Quinn's eyes. "They do. Samuel's grandchildren and a dozen other youngsters have no formal education. There's been talk of converting part of the church into a schoolroom." Josephine stood and moved to the window, looking out at the small town now settling into evening. Lamps were being lit in windows, and she could hear the distant laughter of children being called home for the night. "If I stayed," she said slowly, "those men might still come looking for me." Quinn moved to stand beside her, close but not touching. "They might. But you'd have an entire town to protect you, not just one rancher." Josephine turned to face him. "Is that what you want, for me to stay here in Juniper Creek?" Quinn's eyes held hers, honest and unguarded. "What I want is for you to be safe and happy." His voice softened. "And yes, I want you close enough that I might have a chance to court you properly if you'd allow it." The simple declaration, so heartfelt and direct, brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "I would allow it," she whispered. "Very much." Quinn's hand reached out to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "Then stay. Give Juniper Creek a chance. Give us a chance." Josephine covered his hand with her own. "I'll stay, at least long enough to see if the town truly needs a teacher." The smile that illuminated Quinn's face was like sunrise breaking over the desert, transformative and full of promise. He leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Get some rest," he murmured. "Tomorrow we'll talk to Samuel about the school." Morning brought clear skies and renewed purpose. After breakfast, Quinn and Josephine spoke with Samuel about the possibility of her staying to teach the children of Juniper Creek. The older man was immediately enthusiastic, calling in several neighboring families who happened to be in town that morning to discuss the idea. By noon, it was settled. The church had a side room that could be converted into a schoolroom within a week. The families would provide a small salary, and Josephine would board with the Millers until more permanent arrangements could be made. Classes could begin as soon as the room was ready, and word had spread to all the families in the area. "This calls for a celebration," Samuel declared. "Martha, tell everyone there'll be a dance Saturday night to welcome our new teacher." As word spread through the small community, Josephine found herself the center of attention. Women stopped by the store to introduce themselves and their children, men tipped their hats respectfully as she passed, and several of the older residents shared stories of their own school days back east. Through it all, Quinn remained by her side, his quiet presence a comfort as she navigated her new position in the community. No one questioned the nature of their relationship, seeming to accept Quinn's obvious interest in her as natural and proper. That evening, as they sat on the porch of the hotel watching the sunset paint the western sky, Josephine felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you," she said softly. Quinn glanced at her. "For what?" "For finding me, for saving my life, for bringing me here." She smiled at him. "For giving me a new life when I thought mine was over." Quinn's hand found hers, his calloused fingers intertwining with her smoother ones. "You're the one who chose to stay." "Because you gave me a reason to," Josephine replied simply. The week passed in a flurry of activity as Josephine settled into her new role. The church side room was cleared and furnished with benches and a small desk. Slates were ordered from the nearest large town, and books were collected from families who had them to spare. Samuel donated paper, pencils, and chalk from his store inventory, refusing payment with a wave of his hand. "Consider it an investment in our future," he told Josephine when she protested his generosity. Quinn rode back to his ranch midweek to check on his cattle and retrieve some of Josephine's things that had been left behind. He returned the day before the dance, bringing with him not only her few possessions, but also a small wooden box. "Made this for you," he said somewhat shyly as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name. "Thought you might need it for the school." Inside the box were neatly carved letters of the alphabet, each about 3 inches tall. "For the younger ones," Quinn explained. "To help them learn their letters." Josephine ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "They're perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When did you find time to make these?" "Worked on them at night before you came," Quinn admitted. "My sister used to teach before she married. She always said teaching the little ones their letters was the hardest part." Josephine looked up at him, seeing this man, this cowboy who had found her half dead and given her not just shelter but a future in a new light. "You're a remarkable man, Quinn Thornton." A flush crept up his neck. "Just practical is all." They continued their walk, the conversation turning to the upcoming dance and the families Josephine had met. As they crossed a small footbridge, Quinn suddenly stopped. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said, his expression serious. Josephine's heart quickened. "Yes, those men who came to my ranch looking for you." His eyes searched hers. "You said you didn't take anything from the stage, and I believe you. But could something have been hidden in your belongings without your knowledge?" The question took Josephine by surprise. I don't think so. I had very little with me, just a small carpet bag with some clothing and personal items." She frowned, thinking back. "The bag was torn during the attack." "I left it behind when I ran." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "It's strange they're so determined to find you if you truly know nothing." "Perhaps they simply don't believe there were no survivors," Josephine suggested. "They might think any witness could identify them." "Maybe." Quinn didn't sound convinced. "Just be careful. Keep your eyes open for anything unusual." The conversation left Josephine unsettled, but the excitement of the upcoming dance soon pushed her concerns aside. Martha insisted on helping her prepare, lending her a blue dress that, with some quick alterations, fit well enough for the occasion. "You look lovely," Martha declared as she helped Josephine arrange her hair on Saturday evening. "Quinn Thornton won't know what hit him." Josephine blushed. "Is it that obvious?" Martha chuckled. "My dear, the way that man looks at you would be obvious to a blind person, and the way you look at him." She patted Josephine's shoulder. "It does my heart good to see it. Quinn's been alone too long." The town hall, which was really just a large room attached to the general store, had been transformed for the dance. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor that had been cleared of its usual tables and chairs. A small group of musicians, 2 fiddlers, a guitar player, and a man with a harmonica were setting up in the corner. Josephine entered with Martha and Samuel, immediately aware of the many eyes that turned in her direction. But she sought only one gaze, finding it almost immediately as Quinn stepped forward from where he had been talking with several other men. He had cleaned up for the occasion, his usually wind-blown hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. He wore a clean white shirt under a dark vest, and his best denims had been pressed. But it was the look in his eyes as he saw her that took Josephine's breath away, admiration, desire, and something deeper that made her heart race. "Miss Lambert," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed a more intimate greeting. "You look beautiful tonight." "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," she replied, equally formal though her smile was just for him. "You look quite handsome yourself." The musicians began to play and Quinn offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" The evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and the steady presence of Quinn's hand at her waist or clasping her own. Josephine was introduced to more residents of Juniper Creek, including several of her future pupils who regarded their new teacher with wide-eyed curiosity. During a break in the dancing, Quinn led Josephine outside for some fresh air. The night was cool but not cold, the sky a vast canopy of stars above them. "Happy?" Quinn asked as they stood in the shadows beside the building. "Very," Josephine replied truthfully. "Everyone has been so welcoming. They're good people." Quinn's voice was soft in the darkness. "The kind who look out for their own." "And am I one of their own now?" she asked, half teasing. Quinn turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "You're one of mine," he said simply, "if you want to be." The directness of his words took her breath away. In the 3 weeks since he had found her near death at his barn door, something profound had grown between them, something neither had expected, but both now recognized as rare and precious. "I do," Josephine whispered, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I want that very much." Quinn's other hand came up to touch her cheek, his fingers gentle against her skin. "I know it's soon," he murmured. "We barely know each other, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it." "I feel the same," Josephine admitted, leaning into his touch. "As if everything that happened, even the terrible parts, was leading me to you." Quinn's kiss was tender at first, then deepened as Josephine responded, her arms sliding around his neck. The world seemed to fade away until there was nothing but this moment, this man, and the certainty that she had found where she belonged. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I should take you back inside before we're missed," he said, though he made no move to release her. Josephine nodded reluctantly. "Yes, I suppose we should be proper." Quinn chuckled, the sound warm in the darkness. "Proper would have been asking your father's permission to court you. Since that's not possible, I'll have to settle for asking you directly." He stepped back slightly, his eyes finding hers in the starlight. "Josephine Lambert, may I court you with the intention of asking for your hand once we've had time to know each other better?" The formal request, so unexpected and so perfectly Quinn, brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "Yes, Quinn Thornton, you may court me." They returned to the dance hand in hand, their new understanding evident in the way they looked at each other. If anyone noticed, no one commented directly, though Josephine caught Martha giving her a knowing smile as Quinn led her back onto the dance floor. The following weeks fell into a pattern as Josephine settled into her role as the town's teacher. 15 children attended her classes regularly, ranging in age from 6 to 14. The work was challenging but rewarding, especially as she saw their eager minds responding to her teaching. Quinn rode into town twice a week, ostensibly to deliver eggs and milk from his ranch to the general store, but everyone knew his real purpose was to see Josephine. Their courtship proceeded with proper decorum under the watchful but approving eyes of the community. Quinn would take Josephine for walks along the creek, join her for Sunday services at the church, and occasionally escort her to dinner at one of the local homes. On Saturdays, weather permitting, he would arrive with 2 horses, and they would ride out into the hills surrounding Juniper Creek. These were Josephine's favorite times away from curious eyes. They could talk freely about their hopes and dreams, learning about each other in the way of new lovers discovering the shape of their shared future. It was during one such ride, nearly 2 months after Josephine had come to Juniper Creek, that Quinn finally broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Have you written to your cousin in Prescott?" he asked as they rested their horses near a small spring. Josephine nodded. "Yes, though I haven't received a reply yet. Mail service out here is hardly reliable." Quinn was quiet for a moment, then said, "And have you told her about us?" "I have," Josephine admitted, watching his face carefully. "I told her I had found a teaching position in Juniper Creek and that I had also found someone special." A smile tugged at the corner of Quinn's mouth. "Special, am I?" Josephine laughed, the sound carrying across the open landscape. "Very special," she confirmed, leaning over to place a quick kiss on his cheek. Quinn caught her hand before she could pull away. "Josephine," he said, his voice suddenly serious, "there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes, would you consider?" He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Would you consider making my ranch your home? As my wife," though she had known this question was coming, had hoped for it with increasing certainty over the past weeks, hearing it spoken aloud still made Josephine's breath catch. "Are you asking me to marry you, Quinn Thornton?" she asked softly. "I am." His eyes held hers, honest and unwavering. "I love you, Josephine. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you opened your eyes and looked at me like I was worth trusting, even after all you'd been through." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "And yes, I will marry you. I would be honored to be your wife." The joy that transformed Quinn's face was like nothing Josephine had ever seen, as if all the beauty of the Arizona sky had been distilled into a single expression. He slid from his horse in one fluid movement, then lifted her down from hers, his hands strong and sure at her waist. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't release her, but instead pulled her close, his kiss conveying everything words could not: passion, promise, and the certainty of a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. Later, as they rode back toward town side by side, Josephine felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. The path ahead was clear now: marriage to Quinn, a life on his ranch while still teaching the children of Juniper Creek, building a family together in this wild, beautiful land. They had nearly reached the outskirts of town when Quinn suddenly reined his horse to a stop, his expression alert as he scanned the road ahead. "What is it?" Josephine asked, immediately sensing his concern. "Riders," Quinn said tersely, "coming from town, moving fast." Josephine followed his gaze and saw 3 men on horseback approaching rapidly. As they drew nearer, her blood ran cold. The man in the lead wore a distinctive red bandana. It was the same man who had come to Quinn's ranch looking for her, the same man who had directed the stagecoach massacre. "Quinn," she whispered, fear gripping her heart. "Stay behind me," Quinn ordered, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip as he positioned his horse in front of hers. The riders slowed as they approached, the leader's face breaking into a cold smile as he recognized them. "Well, well," he drawled, his eyes fixed on Josephine. "Fancy meeting you here, madam. Been looking all over for you." Quinn's voice was deceptively calm. "The lady's with me. Whatever business you think you have with her, you can forget it." The leader's smile didn't waver. "My business is with her, not you, rancher. Step aside if you know what's good for you." "Not happening," Quinn replied, his hand now resting openly on his pistol. The tension stretched between them, the only sound the snorting of the horses and the distant call of a hawk overhead. Then the leader's eyes narrowed. "You got something that belongs to my employer, madam," he said, addressing Josephine directly. "A document that was in that leather satchel. We know you took it." "I took nothing," Josephine responded, finding courage in Quinn's steady presence. "I ran for my life after you murdered everyone on that stage." A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face at her direct accusation. "Then how do you explain this?" He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "Found this in what was left of your belongings at the stage. It's a letter addressed to you mentioning the document, says you agreed to carry it to Prescott." Confusion washed over Josephine. "That's impossible. I never agreed to carry anything except my own possessions." "Read it yourself," the man said, extending the paper toward her. Quinn intercepted it, his eyes never leaving the man as he passed the letter back to Josephine. With trembling hands, she unfolded it. The letter was addressed to her, but the contents made no sense. It thanked her for agreeing to deliver an important document to a Mr. Harrison in Prescott, referring to a previous conversation she had never had. The signature at the bottom was that of the well-dressed gentleman who had been killed on the stage, a man she had never spoken to before boarding. "This is a mistake," she said, looking up from the letter. "I never met this man before the journey. We never spoke about any document." The leader's expression hardened. "Maybe, maybe not, but my employer wants what's his and he's willing to pay handsomely for its return." His eyes shifted to Quinn, "Or take more direct measures if necessary." Quinn's hand tightened on his pistol. "You threatening us?" "Just stating facts," the leader replied coolly. "That document's worth a lot to the right people, worth killing for, as you've already seen." Josephine's mind raced. Could the gentleman on the stage have somehow hidden the document among her belongings without her knowledge? But when? And why involve her in something so dangerous without her consent? "I don't have your document," she said firmly. "I left everything behind when I ran from the stage. The only things I had with me when Mr. Thornton found me were the clothes on my back." The leader studied her face, seeming to weigh her words. Then he glanced at Quinn, taking in his protective stance and the determination in his eyes. My employer's a patient man, he said finally. But not infinitely so. We'll be watching. If you remember anything about that document, you'd be wise to let us know. He touched the brim of his hat in a mocking salute. Good day to you both. With that, he wheeled his horse around, his companions following suit. They rode past, giving Quinn and Josephine a wide berth, then spurred their mounts to a gallop toward the open country beyond Juniper Creek. When they were out of sight, Quinn turned to Josephine, his face grave. Are you all right? She nodded, though her hands still trembled. Yes. But Quinn, I swear I knew nothing about any document, that letter. It must be some kind of mistake. I believe you, Quinn said without hesitation. But it doesn't change the fact that these men think you have something they want, something worth killing for. His jaw tightened. We need to talk to Samuel. He might know more about what's going on. They rode into town to find it unusually quiet. The normally bustling Main Street was nearly deserted, with only a few people hurrying about their business, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. Samuel was waiting at the door of his store, his usually jovial face somber. Inside, he said without preamble, both of you. Once they were in the back room of the store, Samuel closed and locked the door behind them. Martha was there, her hands twisting a dish towel anxiously. Those men, Samuel began, they came into town asking questions. About you, Josephine, about where you came from and who you were with. Did anyone tell them? Quinn asked sharply. Samuel shook his head. No one knew much to tell. But they made it clear they'd be back, and they weren't too subtle about what might happen if they didn't get what they wanted. Josephine sank into a chair, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. This is all my fault, she whispered. I've brought danger to all of you. Nonsense, Martha said firmly, coming to stand beside her. You didn't ask for any of this. Quinn knelt in front of Josephine, taking her hands in his. Martha's right, this isn't your fault. He glanced up at Samuel, but we need to figure out what's going on. Do you know anything about a document that might have been on that stage, something valuable enough to kill for? Samuel stroked his beard thoughtfully. There have been rumors. The mining company that's trying to buy up land around here has been having trouble with claim jumpers. Some say they've been using forged documents to take over smaller claims. He looked at Josephine. Could that be what they're after, a document that proves the fraud? I don't know, Josephine admitted, but the letter mentioned delivering it to someone named Harrison in Prescott. Samuel's eyebrows rose. Harrison, as in Judge Harrison, Quinn straightened. You know him. Of him, Samuel corrected. He's the federal judge assigned to this territory, has a reputation for being incorruptible. If someone had evidence of fraud, he'd be the one to take it to. The pieces began to fall into place in Josephine's mind. So the man on the stage might have been carrying evidence against the mining company, and somehow he tried to involve me without my knowledge. But why you? Martha asked, perplexed. Because she was innocent, Quinn said suddenly. A schoolteacher traveling to visit family would draw less attention than a mining company whistleblower. His expression darkened. He put you in danger without your consent. Josephine frowned, trying to remember every detail of the journey. He did ask to place his satchel under my seat when the stage got crowded, said it would give me more room. Her eyes widened as another memory surfaced. And he insisted on helping me with my carpet bag when we stopped at a way station. He carried it for me. He could have put something in it then. Samuel nodded grimly. Sounds like he was trying to use you as an unwitting courier. But I don't have the document, Josephine insisted. I left everything behind when I ran. Everything? Quinn asked quietly. What about your mother's locket? You were wearing it when I found you. Josephine's hand went automatically to her throat where the small silver locket hung beneath her dress. Yes, but it couldn't be. She pulled the chain over her head, examining the familiar piece of jewelry. It had been her mother's most treasured possession, a simple silver oval with a delicate floral pattern engraved on its surface. Her fingers traced the edge, finding the tiny hinge that had always been there. But as she looked more closely in the bright lamp light, she noticed something unusual, a nearly invisible seam running around the edge that didn't belong. It's been tampered with, she whispered, her fingers trying to pry at the new seam. The outer casing of the locket separated, revealing a thin piece of paper folded tightly and hidden between the original locket and what now appeared to be a false backing. With trembling fingers, Josephine extracted the paper and unfolded it carefully. It was a legal document, covered with official stamps and signatures, along with a small hand-drawn map. Samuel leaned closer, adjusting his spectacles. "It's a mineral rights deed," he said after studying it for a moment. "And if I'm not mistaken, it shows that the Silver Crescent Mining Company has been operating on land they don't legally own." He looked up, his expression grave. "This would invalidate every claim they've filed in the last year. It would cost them millions." "No wonder they were willing to kill for it," Quinn said softly. "And they'll keep killing until they get it back." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Josephine refolded the document, her mind racing. "We need to get this to Judge Harrison," she said finally. "It's the only way to end this," Quinn nodded. "I'll take it to Prescott." "No," Josephine said firmly. "We'll take it together. I'm as involved in this as you are now." Quinn started to protest, but the determination in Josephine's eyes stopped him. "All right," he conceded. "But we leave at first light and we don't take the main roads." Samuel cleared his throat. "I think you should leave tonight," he suggested. "Those men will be watching the roads tomorrow. If you slip out after dark, you might get a head start." The plan came together quickly. Samuel would provide fresh horses and supplies. Quinn and Josephine would travel north through the hills, avoiding the main trails, then cut east toward Prescott. It would take longer than the direct route, but it offered the best chance of avoiding their pursuers. As Martha helped her pack a small bag with essentials, Josephine fought back tears. "I'm sorry to leave like this," she said. "The children—" "Will be waiting for you when you return," Martha assured her, squeezing her hand. "And you will return, Josephine, you and Quinn both." By nightfall, they were ready. The document was secured in a waterproof pouch that Quinn wore beneath his shirt. They carried minimal supplies, food for 3 days, water, a single blanket each, and their weapons. Quinn had his rifle and pistol. Samuel had insisted Josephine take a small derringer that had belonged to his daughter. "Just in case," he'd said grimly as he showed her how to load and fire it. They slipped out of town through the darkness, riding north into the hills that rose beyond Juniper Creek. The night was clear, the stars providing just enough light to see the path ahead. They rode in silence, each lost in thought as the miles stretched behind them. It was near midnight when Quinn finally called a halt beside a small stream. "The horses need rest," he said as he helped Josephine dismount. "And so do you." They made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might be seen. Quinn spread the blankets beneath a stand of pines while Josephine filled their canteens from the stream. The night air had grown chill, and Josephine shivered as she returned to where Quinn waited. Without a word, he opened his arms and she went to him, seeking his warmth and the comfort of his embrace. They sat together beneath the stars, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered after a long silence. "For bringing this trouble into your life." Quinn's arm tightened around her. "Don't apologize for something that wasn't your doing." His voice was low in the darkness. "Besides, finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, trouble or not." Josephine turned to look up at him, her heart full. "Even with men trying to kill us," a smile touched his lips, "even then." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We'll get through this, Josephine, and then we'll go home and get married just like we planned." "Is that a promise, Quinn Thornton?" she asked softly. "It's more than that," he replied, his eyes holding hers in the starlight. "It's a certainty." Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the urgency of those who know the future is uncertain. When they finally parted, Josephine rested her head against his chest again, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We should get some sleep," Quinn said reluctantly. "Dawn comes early and we have a long ride ahead." They lay down on their separate blankets, but as the night grew colder, Quinn reached for her, drawing her close against him. "For warmth," he murmured as she nestled against his side. "For warmth," she agreed, though they both knew it was more than that. In the face of danger, the boundaries of propriety seemed less important than the comfort of being together. Josephine slept fitfully, waking often to every small sound of the forest around them. Each time she found Quinn awake and watchful, his arm a reassuring weight around her shoulders. Just before dawn, she finally fell into a deeper sleep, only to be woken by Quinn's hand gently shaking her shoulder. "Time to go," he whispered. "I heard horses on the trail below." They packed quickly and silently, erasing all signs of their presence before mounting and continuing north. The day was overcast, the sun a pale disk behind clouds that promised rain. They rode at a steady pace, Quinn leading the way through terrain that grew increasingly rugged. By midday, they had reached a high ridge that offered a view of the country behind them. Quinn dismounted, pulling a small spyglass from his saddlebag to scan the landscape. "See anything?" Josephine asked anxiously. Quinn's face was grim as he lowered the glass. "3 riders following our trail, moving fast." Josephine's heart sank. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Someone in town must have talked," Quinn said, helping her remount. "Or they guessed which way we'd go." He swung into his own saddle. "We need to pick up the pace." They pushed on through the afternoon, the sky growing darker as the promised storm approached. The first drops of rain began to fall as they descended into a narrow valley, the path becoming slick and treacherous. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," Quinn called over his shoulder as the rain intensified. "Used to belong to a cattle outfit that went bust. We can shelter there until the storm passes." The rain was falling in sheets by the time the small cabin came into view, a weathered structure of logs and rough-hewn planks that had seen better days. Quinn dismounted quickly, leading his horse to a lean-to attached to one side of the cabin. Josephine followed, grateful for any shelter from the driving rain. The interior of the cabin was dusty but dry, with a small fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot in one corner. Quinn quickly set about building a fire while Josephine shook out their wet blankets. "The rain might help us," Quinn said as the first flames flickered to life. "It'll wash away our tracks." Josephine nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that their pursuers were drawing nearer with each passing hour. "How much farther to Prescott?" "If we keep to the mountains, another 2 days at least," Quinn replied, adding more wood to the growing fire. "What if we risk the main trails, but that would be dangerous." Josephine moved to stand beside him, the warmth of the fire welcome after the chill of the rain. "Do you think we'll make it?" Quinn turned to her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes," he said with quiet certainty. "I won't let anything happen to you, Josephine." She believed in his strength, his determination, his love, but she also knew that some things were beyond even his control. "It's not just me I'm worried about," she admitted softly. "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you because of me." Quinn's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "Nothing's going to happen to either of us. We'll deliver that document, see justice done, and then go home. Together." The conviction in his voice was almost enough to make her believe it could be that simple. Almost. A sudden noise outside the cabin brought them both alert, the sound of a branch breaking underfoot. Quinn moved to the window, carefully peering out through the rain-streaked glass. "Get down," he whispered urgently, drawing his pistol. "Someone's out there." Josephine crouched beside the cot as Quinn positioned himself by the door, his body tense and ready. For a long moment, there was only the sound of rain hammering on the roof, then a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there. Come out with the document, and no one needs to get hurt." Quinn's eyes met Josephine's across the room. "It's them," he mouthed silently. Josephine nodded, her heart pounding as she reached for the small derringer in her pocket. Quinn shook his head sharply, warning her to stay hidden. "There's no document here," he called back. "Just a rancher and his fiancée caught in the storm." A harsh laugh answered him. "Nice try, Thornton. We know who you're with and what you're carrying. Send the woman out with the document and we'll let you both live." "Not going to happen," Quinn replied, his voice steady despite the danger. "Ride on and leave us be." The response was a bullet that splintered the window frame inches from Quinn's head. He ducked down, crawling to where Josephine crouched. "There's a back window," he whispered. "It's small, but you could fit through it if you can make it to the horses." "I'm not leaving you," Josephine interrupted fiercely. "We stay together." Quinn looked as though he wanted to argue, but another bullet tore through the cabin wall, sending splinters flying. "All right," he conceded. "Together it is, but we need a plan." Josephine's mind raced. "The rain," she said suddenly. "It's coming down hard. If we could create a distraction, maybe we could slip away in the storm." Quinn nodded slowly. "The lamp oil," he said, glancing at a small tin on the shelf above the fireplace. "If we set fire to the lean-to, it would draw them to that side of the cabin. We could go out the back while they're dealing with it. But the horses," Josephine began. "We'll free them first," Quinn assured her. "They'll run from the fire, but they won't go far. We can catch them once we're clear." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Quinn moved silently to the shelf, retrieving the tin of lamp oil while Josephine gathered their few belongings. Outside, their pursuers had gone quiet, a silence more menacing than their earlier threats. "Ready," Quinn whispered when they had prepared everything. Josephine nodded, her throat too tight for words. Quinn pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. "On my signal, run for the trees behind the cabin. Don't stop, don't look back, I'll be right behind you." Moving carefully to avoid the windows, Quinn made his way to the back door. Josephine followed, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it could be heard over the rain. Quinn eased the door open just enough to see outside. The rain was still falling heavily, obscuring visibility beyond a few yards. "Now," he whispered, slipping outside. Josephine followed him into the downpour, staying close as they crept around the side of the cabin to where the horses were sheltered in the lean-to. Working quickly, Quinn untied them while Josephine kept watch. When the horses were free, Quinn pulled the tin from his coat and splashed the oil over the wooden structure. "Go," he urged, striking a match. "Run for the trees, I'll light this and follow." Josephine hesitated only a moment, then turned and ran, her feet slipping on the rain-soaked ground. Behind her, she heard a whoosh as the oil caught fire despite the rain, followed by shouts of alarm from the men watching the cabin. She reached the tree line and ducked behind a large pine, turning back to see Quinn running toward her, his figure illuminated by the rapidly spreading fire. Relief flooded through her as he joined her in the shelter of the trees. "It worked," she gasped. "They're all at the front of the cabin," Quinn nodded, catching his breath. "Won't take them long to realize we're gone. We need to keep moving." They pushed deeper into the forest, the rain and gathering darkness providing cover as they fled. The horses, as Quinn had predicted, hadn't gone far, and they managed to catch them after about half a mile. Mounting quickly, they continued east, leaving the burning cabin and their pursuers behind. The rain eventually slackened to a drizzle, then stopped altogether as night fell. They rode through the darkness, guided by Quinn's knowledge of the stars and his instinct for the land. Neither spoke much, saving their strength for the journey ahead. It was well past midnight when Quinn finally called a halt in a small clearing surrounded by dense pines. "We need to rest," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Just for a few hours, then we'll push on at first light." They made a cold camp again, too tired and too wary to risk a fire. Their clothes had mostly dried during the ride, but the night air was cold, and Josephine shivered as she wrapped herself in her blanket. Without hesitation, Quinn moved to sit beside her, opening his own blanket to create a shared cocoon of warmth. "Come here," he murmured, and Josephine went willingly into his embrace. "You think we lost them?" she asked as she settled against his chest. "For now," Quinn replied, his arms tightening around her. "But they'll pick up our trail again by morning. We need to reach Prescott tomorrow if we can." Josephine nodded, too exhausted to argue. "Quinn," she said after a moment, "if anything happens—" "Nothing's going to happen," he interrupted firmly. "But if it does," she persisted, "I want you to know that finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me too. You gave me a new life when I thought mine was over." She tilted her head to look up at him. "I love you, Quinn Thornton. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that." Quinn's eyes were dark with emotion as he gazed down at her. "I'll remember," he promised. "And I'll love you until my last breath." Josephine Lambert. Their kiss was tender yet urgent, filled with all the words they couldn't say and the fears they couldn't voice. When they finally settled to sleep, it was with the knowledge that tomorrow would either bring them to safety or to greater danger. But whatever came, they would face it together. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having moved on during the night. They rose with the first light, sharing the last of their provisions before mounting and continuing their journey east. The terrain grew more familiar to Quinn as they approached the outskirts of Prescott, and by midday, they could see the town nestled in the valley below. "We made it," Josephine breathed, relief washing over her. Quinn's expression remained cautious. "We're not safe yet. We still need to find Judge Harrison and deliver the document." They approached the town carefully, avoiding the main road and entering from the north where the trees provided cover almost to the edge of town. Prescott was larger than Juniper Creek, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and the bustle of a growing territorial capital. Quinn led them to a small livery stable on the outskirts of town, where he arranged to leave their tired horses. "Better to proceed on foot," he explained as they walked toward the center of town. "Less noticeable." The courthouse was a substantial building of red brick, its importance to the community evident in its size and the quality of its construction. They climbed the steps, Quinn's hand at the small of Josephine's back, both alert for any sign of their pursuers. Inside, they were directed to Judge Harrison's chambers by a clerk who eyed their trail-worn appearance with barely concealed suspicion. The judge himself proved to be a tall, austere man with silver hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to look right through them as they were shown into his office. "Judge Harrison," Quinn began, "we have something that belongs in your hands, something people have died for." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's quite a statement, Mr. Thornton, Quinn Thornton, and this is Miss Josephine Lambert." Recognition flickered in the judge's eyes at Josephine's name. "Lambert, were you by chance on the Tucson stage that was attacked 3 weeks ago?" Josephine's surprise must have shown on her face, for the judge continued, "Word reached us about the attack. There was a report that one passenger might have survived." His gaze sharpened. "That would be you, I take it." "Yes, Your Honor," Josephine confirmed. "I was the only survivor." The judge nodded slowly. "And this item people have died for." Quinn reached into his shirt and withdrew the waterproof pouch containing the document. "This was hidden in Miss Lambert's locket without her knowledge. It appears to be evidence of fraud by the Silver Crescent Mining Company." Judge Harrison took the document, his expression unchanged as he carefully examined it. "This is indeed a serious matter," he said finally. "If this deed is authentic, it invalidates numerous claims filed by Silver Crescent." He looked up at them. "Do you understand the significance of what you've brought me?" "We know it was worth killing for," Quinn replied grimly. "The men who attacked the stage have been hunting Miss Lambert ever since. They followed us all the way from Juniper Creek." The judge rose from his desk. "Then we must act quickly. Wait here." He strode to the door, spoke briefly to someone outside, then returned. "I've sent for the marshal. In the meantime, I suggest you both remain here where it's safe." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The marshal arrived, listened to their story, then departed with several deputies to set up a watch for the men pursuing them. Judge Harrison examined the document thoroughly, consulting legal references and making notes. Clerks came and went, carrying messages and bringing refreshments for Quinn and Josephine, who remained in the safety of the judge's chambers. As evening approached, the marshal returned with news. "We've apprehended 2 men matching the description you gave," he informed them. "They were asking about you at the hotel. The 3rd man, the leader, is still at large, but we have men watching all the roads into town." Judge Harrison nodded in satisfaction. "Good work, Marshal. Now, Mr. Thornton, Miss Lambert, I believe arrangements should be made for your safety tonight. I've taken the liberty of securing rooms for you at my own home where my deputies can keep watch." Quinn glanced at Josephine, who nodded her agreement. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, "but there's one more thing." He straightened, his hand finding Josephine's. "Miss Lambert has agreed to become my wife. We would like to be married as soon as possible." The judge's stern features softened slightly. "I see. Well, I am authorized to perform marriages. If that's truly your wish, I could conduct the ceremony tomorrow morning." "It is our wish," Josephine confirmed, her heart full as she looked at Quinn. more than anything. That night, they stayed in separate rooms in Judge Harrison's comfortable home, under the watchful eye of his staff and the deputies assigned to their protection. Despite the luxury of a proper bed and a hot bath, Josephine found sleep elusive, her mind too full of the day's events and the promise of tomorrow. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of anticipation that overrode her lingering fears. The leader of their pursuers was still at large, but within the safety of the judge's home, surrounded by armed deputies. The danger seemed remote compared to the joy of the day ahead. Martha would be disappointed to miss the wedding, Josephine thought as Judge Harrison's housekeeper helped her prepare. The woman had provided a simple but elegant dress pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and had arranged Josephine's hair with flowers from the judge's garden. "You look beautiful, my dear," the housekeeper said, stepping back to admire her work. "Your young man won't know what hit him." Josephine smiled, touching the silver locket at her throat, now empty of its dangerous contents but still precious as her mother's legacy. "Thank you for your kindness." The ceremony took place in Judge Harrison's study, with the marshal and the housekeeper serving as witnesses. Quinn, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes provided by the judge, waited for Josephine with an expression of such love and pride that it brought tears to her eyes. Judge Harrison conducted the ceremony with dignified simplicity, his deep voice filling the room as Quinn and Josephine exchanged their vows. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. "Mrs. Thornton," he whispered as they parted, the words bringing a smile to Josephine's lips. "Mr. Thornton," she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst with happiness. Their celebration was interrupted by the arrival of a deputy with urgent news. The third man had been apprehended trying to leave town on the western road. The danger was finally, truly over. "Well," Judge Harrison said, a rare smile crossing his austere features, "it seems fortune favors the brave and the righteous. The document you brought will ensure justice is done, and the men who pursued you will face the consequences of their crimes. What happens now?" Quinn asked, his arm around Josephine's waist. "Now," the judge replied, "you go home and begin your life together. The rest is in the hands of the law." 2 days later, with fresh horses and supplies provided by the grateful judge, Quinn and Josephine began the journey back to Juniper Creek. They traveled at a leisurely pace, no longer hunted, no longer afraid. Each night they made camp beneath the stars, now sharing a single blanket as husband and wife, learning the contours of their new relationship with joy and wonder. When they finally crested the hill overlooking Juniper Creek, Josephine felt a surge of emotion at the sight of the small town that had become her home. Smoke rose from chimneys, children played in the schoolyard, and life continued as it always had, steady, determined, full of quiet strength like the man beside her. "Home," Quinn said softly, reaching for her hand. "Almost," Josephine replied with a smile. "I believe you promised me a ranch with a new barn and an orchard of saplings." Quinn laughed, the sound carrying on the clear air. "So I did, Mrs. Thornton, so I did." They rode down into town to find a welcome they hadn't expected. The entire community gathered in the street, cheering their return. Samuel and Martha rushed forward, enveloping them in embraces as they dismounted. "We got word from the judge yesterday," Samuel explained, beaming. "About the document, the arrests, and your marriage." He pumped Quinn's hand vigorously. "Couldn't be happier for you both." The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing in the town hall. Quinn and Josephine were the center of attention, retelling their adventure with some details judiciously omitted, and receiving congratulations from everyone in town. As the night drew to a close, Quinn leaned close to whisper in Josephine's ear, "Ready to see our home?" She nodded, suddenly eager to begin this new chapter of their life together. They said their goodbyes, promising Martha that Josephine would return to her teaching duties the following week, and rode out of town toward Quinn's ranch, their ranch now. The small house looked just as Josephine remembered it, though Quinn had clearly been busy in the days before they fled to Prescott. The new barn was partially constructed, its framework rising solidly against the night sky. And there, just beyond the house, were the saplings he had spoken of, a dozen young apple trees, carefully planted and staked against the wind. Quinn lifted her from her horse and carried her across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. A fire had been laid in the hearth, Samuel's doing, no doubt, and the house was warm and welcoming. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," Quinn said, his voice husky with emotion. Josephine looked around at the simple room that would be the heart of their home, then back at the man who had found her at death's door and given her a new life filled with love and purpose. "I am home," she whispered, reaching for him. "Wherever you are, that's my home now." Their kiss sealed the promise of a future neither could have imagined that fateful day when Josephine had collapsed near Quinn's barn door. A future built on courage, determination, and a love that had bloomed in the harsh beauty of the Arizona territory, as resilient and enduring as the land itself. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Quinn would always begin the story the same way. "Your mother passed out near the barn door until a cowboy found her and gave her a new life." And Josephine would smile, knowing that in saving her, Quinn had also saved himself from a life of solitude, creating instead a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come.